Hello and welcome to the brand called You. I'm Sandeep Tyagi, your host, and today the brand we are speaking to is Dr. Vijay Chandru. Dr. Chandru is a founder of Strand Life Sciences, a pioneering company which was recently acquired by Reliance Strategic Business Ventures. He's a fellow of Indian Academy of Sciences. He's a professor for a long time in Indian Institute of Science and continues there in their Biotechnic Center. He's co-author of a book on optimization and has a PhD from MIT and an engineering degree from BITS. Welcome to our show, Dr. Chandru.
Thank you for having me, Sandeep. Yeah, happy to be here.
Well, let's start about talking about your entrepreneurial journey. You were one of the earliest, if not the earliest, people who made the jump from academics to being an entrepreneur. This was in 1992, if I remember correctly. You were happily teaching in Purdue in US after your PhD, and then you moved to Bangalore, started teaching at ISC, and then shortly thereafter also set up businesses and companies. Tell us about that. How did you make that decision and what prompted that change?
Right. Well, thank you. Yeah, I think, after my PhD, I was pretty much in the academic track, right? I done my PhD in operations research at MIT, joined the faculty in a tenure track position at Purdue, and had, went straight through. Once I got tenure, then, I took a sabbatical, came to India, spent a year and a half at the Indian Institute of Science, and also worked with the Center for AI and Robotics in the defense research labs, and then went back to Purdue because I still had some commitments there. And meanwhile, the Indian Institute of Science indicated that they would like to have me come back as a permanent faculty member. And, I think the idea of coming back to India had been clearly already in our minds. And as a family, we evaluated and we were all pretty much for it. So in 1992, actually, I returned officially to after resigning from Purdue, and then took up a position in computer science and automation at the Indian Institute of Science. Shortly thereafter, I met a few kindred spirits, and on the faculty in computer science, and the four of us, and this included someone you know well, Ramesh Hariharan, who had just come to join our faculty in 1995, and Swami Manohar and Vinay Vishwanath. And the four of us decided we'll create a different kind of lab in campus. And we also, wanted to be a little more entrepreneurial. Bangalore was starting to get very exciting. There was lots of tech going on, and entrepreneurship was in the air. There were all the IT giants starting to grow, and so we basically built a lab that would work more closely with industry. It was kind of a mini media lab. It was styled after the MIT Media Lab. We called it the Perceptual Computing Lab, and we started consulting and working with industry. And the trigger for entrepreneurship really came a little bit from, we were already sort of on the commercial path in some ways, and then Ratan Tata came to address the court of the Indian Institute of Science, and it's always been someone from the Tatas who presides over the court. And Ratan Tata, in his first address, I think this was 1998, 99, basically called out the fact that while the Indian Institute of Science had been sort of the incubator for many, many public sector research labs, including space research, telephony, you name it, right? Machine tools, lots and lots of major undertakings had come out of IISc, but the private sector had not been that deeply affected. And he said, how come with all the great stuff that happens here, there are no spin-off companies and no research park that we see around here. So that night, I think Manohar and I wrote a letter to the director saying, we have a lab and, we think there are a couple of commercializable technologies. And, what's the process to start up companies? The director of Govardhan Mehta at that time was quite forthright and quickly responded saying, we have no process in place, but I'll appoint a committee. And I am open to the idea. So that began a process. I think it took about a year. And at the end of that year, this was in 2000, by the time all this was in place, we got an approval from the Council of the Indian Institute of Science to go ahead and actually commercialize 2 technologies from our lab. We had been working on building one of India's first handheld computers, the computer. And so, that was identified as one technology ready to go out. And the other was we were doing a lot of work in computational biology and, and molecular dynamics visualization and so on, using sort of virtual reality representations. And so the council basically said, these would be 2 good areas to take forward. And then the 4 of us became founders, and we decided to split in the sense that 2 of us, Ramesh and I, took primary responsibility for the computational biology company, which by then had been called Strand Genomics. And Manohar and Vinay took charge of the computer company, which was called Pico Peta Computers. And, we all participated in both companies in the first few years. But, gradually Strand became Ramesh's and my baby, so to speak, right? Sure. I was pretty old to be a first-time entrepreneur. I was 47 when I took this step. So it was great to have a young, co-founder with me, because I think, that sort of energized me. And I think, so it's been, a wonderful journey. And if I think back as to, I talked about it more from an opportunistic perspective, that Ratan Tata opened the door and we went through. But culturally, I think, having been raised, so to speak, as a young academic at MIT, I had seen a lot of academics start companies, right? And
but not in India.
Yeah, but not in India. Not in India. Even at Purdue, where I taught for almost 10 years, the guy who developed the simulation languages, SLAM, and so on, he was my squash buddy. So the faculty, it's not as prolific as MIT, but the idea of starting companies was really pretty much ingrained in the culture there. So, when it came to India and, we basically went into an academic environment where this had not been done. I think, maybe all those influences, did nudge me in that direction. I did, in some sense, being the gray-haired one amongst the 4, I did already know quite a few industry leaders and so on. So in many ways, probably, helped in getting everyone comfortable with the idea of becoming entrepreneurs and going forward. Yeah.
A lot of firsts there, and I'm sure if any academics or professors are watching this, I'm not sure it's even now that common that people make that jump after spending time in academia. So this could be inspiration for someone else, just like Ratan Tata was yours when you heard that.
Sure.
Let's talk about another first. As far as I know, India and Bangalore in particular has been a hub of IT industry, large scale work, doing a lot of outsourcing, and some may say maybe not the cutting edge work, but a lot of work gets done. You, on the other hand, built a company which was staffed by a lot of PhDs. How was that journey? How was it to build a culture, build a company, particularly in Bangalore at that time, and attract people, many of them who had gone to premier institutes all over the world, to come back and work in this vision? Can you describe what that was like?
Sure. You're right. I think we were a different kind of company. And I think, right from the outset, we were very clear that as four professors who were actually doing very well in academic careers, to step out and create something, we better be doing something that's really different, right? So the difference was going to be that we were going to do things that would have scientific impact as well, right? So I think, just to take a step back, I think science had entered its fourth paradigm, the data-driven science, right? And biology was just starting to get there.
So sorry, what are the four paradigms?
The four paradigms are, basic empirical science, theoretical science, computational science, and then data-driven science, right? So this fourth paradigm business was, one of the ways of describing this evolution, and as data scientists, in some sense, the four of us were actually looking at biology from that perspective, right? And the value proposition to us was very clear, right? For biology to become a quantitative science, right? It was going to need the best in class of data science to be brought to build the tools and improve their ways to look at all the measurements now that they were able to make, right? And experimental data was starting to spew out of various high throughput platforms, and what they actually needed was essentially a MATLAB. A MATLAB had done a lot in the physical sciences, but the life sciences didn't have anything like that. So that was our driving idea, right? And we said, let's actually build a platform that can actually do this well. And so that with that idea, we actually went out to venture capital folks and raised money to build a team that could build something like this, right? Now, obviously, when you're doing something so different and in some sense very interdisciplinary, you had to have good people, right? Otherwise, and so we had to have really strong data scientists, coders as well. We had to have good molecular biologists who were willing to talk to computer scientists, right? And so it became a process of building a team that could cross the chasm, right, between biologists and computer scientists, and that was a lot of fun actually doing it. Lots of challenges as well. I think software guys were being paid way too much, already by then. So we had this situation where a BTech from an IIT would come in at a salary, either equal to or slightly higher than a PhD in molecular biology, right?
Mhm.
The culture also was very different. I always said that the computer scientists we had were mostly anarchists by in nature, while biologists really come through a very hierarchical structure, right? There's the PI, then there's the postdoc, then the PhD student, and then there's the dishwasher, right, and so on. So they come steeped in that culture. So it was really fun to see all of this interaction, and I think it just became a very collegial place. And I think maybe just because we were college professors, right, and so we had a very sort of flat, open door culture, and very gender sensitive as well. I mean, I think we are probably one of the earliest companies to actually have a creche on campus. And so many of our young PhD molecular biologists and so on who wanted to go ahead with a family would be able to bring their children to work, and so at various points Strand actually had about 50-50 in terms of gender mix. So, and that in itself created an extraordinary environment. So I think it
Very
was a
interesting. Another.
great experiment in many ways, right? Yeah. So
Yeah. And certainly way early, even now
right,
we are talking about how to build product companies, how to build research-led companies. So
right.
fascinating stuff that you were doing 20 years ago. Um, this promise of computational biology, we've all heard, and
Right.
every now and then we get some news. I know you serve on different government and private bodies in terms of how this would shape up. In your mind, what would be the first few applications where an everyday person will start getting impacted by the advances in genetic or computational biology? And what do you think would change day to day for us if we visited a doctor or a hospital or even at our home through this technology?
Right. So no, I think it's a question that maybe, if you don't mind, I'll take a little bit of step back here. Um, in some sense, and I guess you're alluding mainly to genomics, but I could talk about the other aspects as well. But remember, by around the time we started in 2000, the human genome had just been sequenced, right? And for the first 10 years or so after that, the task was really to annotate the human genome, to understand what the code meant, right? And so then the tools we built really helped to do that. So the platform we built, called Suchika originally and then renamed Avadis by the marketing guys, basically was had a user base of almost 30% of research biology labs around the world, right? Now, it that in itself was great satisfaction to us. But the task that was actually being carried out in those years was really, just annotation of the genomes, just to figure out, what they coded for and what that mean in biological pathways and so forth. So it was only around 2010 or 11 that we started seeing that the annotation had reached a point where real applications began, right? And this was the start of what was called in those days personalized medicine, right? And so you were starting to get very high-profile cases of someone whose genome was sequenced, and then that would actually lead to a certain clinical decision that could save them or make a difference in their lives. The extraordinary thing that was also happening was, like Moore's law, the sequencing technologies of genomics were doubling at a rate, in fact, even faster than Moore's law. Mm-hmm. And so today, if you look at the curves of Moore's law versus the cost of sequencing, till about 2017, you see that it was the genomic law was almost at the square of Moore's law, right? Hmm. And between 2007 and 2017 or so. And then, of course, it's been a little bit flat. And the reason for that, is our friends at Illumina, right? They've pretty much been a monopoly there. And I think there hasn't been pressure on the costs to drop further. But like Moore's law, I think, there may be a little bit of a plateau right now, but it will drop. And I think it really, when we got started with all this, some biologists with a very long vision, like Charles Cantor, who was, one of the founders of the Human Genome Project, had clearly stated that it was when the cost of a whole genome sequence comes below $100 that you'll see the true impact, right? And unfortunately, it's still hovering around $600 or $700. And I think, we're probably going to have to see that drop a little further before it really becomes a household sort of talking point as you asked, right? But what has happened is that, certainly in oncology today, right? If someone in the family gets diagnosed with cancer, almost the first question you would ask is, has the tumor been sequenced or the tissue been sequenced? Or if the tumor was hard to get hold of, have you done a liquid biopsy sequencing, right? And because that sequence and that information about what were the mutations that caused the cancer, is actually almost a better signature than knowing where the cancer came from, right? So, I mean, normally we've associated cancer with tissue of origin. So we say lung cancer or stomach cancer, gastric, or breast cancer, and so on. But actually, it's the molecular signature that often tells you more about how to treat and so forth. So it has become kind of standard of care now in oncology. And in some sense, oncology has also been a driver because I think the commercials associated with running a test like this, which is still a little pricey. It could vary anywhere from $300 for a very specific test to $6,000, is what sometimes you would pay to send the sample to the US and get it sequenced at a lab. Yeah. So I think, now will it actually become a technology that could be part of, say, an annual checkup, right? Will it actually ever be retailed, right? As a population sort of health profiling? I think it will. It's a question of time. And of course, it has entered in certain areas of what we call almost recreational genomics, right? Like, like 23andMe and so on were all successful there. But I think it's there's Ancestry.com and so on. I think there's been some forays into areas that have affected a lot of people,
Yeah.
but I think
But
health-wise,
so maybe in a few years, as the cost
right,
comes down below 100 and it becomes more
right,
readily available or
yeah.
repeatable, the change would be there. The amount of research in this, there was a staggering piece of information I learned some time ago. The number of papers on genetic research that get published or are available broadly is a staggering number. Every day there is something getting published, something getting understood about the genome and how it works. With all that knowledge, would you say we have a reasonable sense of how a human genome works, or there are vast areas of mystery in this field?
Right. So I think, we are getting close to the point where, I think we have a handle on the software of biology. Right? And that's what computational biology has given, right? And genomics and so forth. So I think the parts list was, was being worked out, the cell, the RNA, the DNA, and so forth. All the parts list was in place. It needed the software, right? And so I think the understanding of biological systems, I think we are getting a pretty good sense of, I would say, the cause and effect, causal relationships, right? I think where we are still stuck in biology in some ways is how systems work, right? I think it's so evident, right?
Yeah.
Where even today with the pandemic and the vaccines and so forth, our understanding of how immunology works, right, it's a classic challenge, right? Because I think it's a very complex system, and while we know, that the mRNA will get in and do some things, and some protein will get expressed, all of that we understand. But then how all of that will interact and how your actual body responds is still a bit of a mystery. So that mystery continues, I think. Right?
Yeah, as we have evidenced with all the confusion and bungling that has been happening with public policies on how to really handle these things. Right. It's not been easy to draw a straight line of cause and effect on right. what exact measures can be taken to handle. Right. So let's change gears a bit to your personal journey. Tell us, where did you grow up and how was your childhood like?
Right. So, yeah, charmed childhood in some ways. I mean, I think you see the picture behind me. That's of my maternal grandfather. He raised me. My dad was in government service, was getting posted everywhere. So we were left with maternal grandparents, like many families in India. And so I was raised by him, and he was a pretty extraordinary guy. His name was B.N. Reddy, and he was the founder of Telugu cinema and a movie director, film director. It's actually the first South Indian to win the Dahasab Phalke Award, and also was a Padma Bhushan, and so on. So it was just extraordinary, sort of growing up raised by him. My dad came into the picture a little later when he was also posted in Chennai, and he's more like an older brother to me, right? And I think so. So that was the sort of wonderful childhood that I had. And
never got tempted or drawn to be an actor?
To be an actor? Yeah, no, many people have asked me this. I think, no, I think Granddad was actually a little disillusioned with how commercial the business had become. He was a little old school, and so he sort of protected us from too much exposure to film stars and so on, right? So I grew up thinking, science and engineering was what I was, what I was destined for. I must say that I do enjoy uh, in theater, and I used to actually act quite a lot in plays and direct them and so on in college, and and later on teaching, really became like being on a stage, right? And so I think they were channels, right, that one could use, right, for this. But I think yeah. So it was the usual childhood, other than this being with this very remarkable man and watching him make films and so on. But otherwise, was crazy about cricket, played for school.
Where did you get the discipline? You were in this movie household with, you said, charmed kind of a childhood, but then you ended up going to BITS and doing a PhD at MIT. What was the driving force to get that kind of level of motivation?
Yeah, and that sort of academic orientation and so on, and that discipline in intellectual pursuit, I think probably should give the credit to my dad for, right? He was in the first batch of the IAS. He was actually a zoologist who was about to start his PhD when India won independence, and was convinced by his family, full of politicians, who said, it's time to be involved in nation building. So he gave up his academic pursuits and entered the civil service, and that became the first batch of the IAS in Karnataka. So, of course, by the time I was 8 or 9, he had moved to Chennai for a while, and then he started having much more direct influence on me, and just I think in some sense was my role model as far as getting disciplined about academia was concerned. Getting to Pilani was a little bit of following some older cousins who had grown up in Delhi, and it was very unusual for someone from Chennai to come all the way to BITS Pilani, right? We had our own Gindi engineering and AC Tech and so on, and of course IIT was also there in Chennai. But I love the idea of moving a little far away and sort of enjoying, learning how to live differently. And Pilani was great. I mean, just went away for 5 years, and then of course once I was there, the idea of pursuing higher education. Must say that a big influence there was Professor C.R. Mitra, who's the director of BITS. He had an MIT connection, and also he brought some interesting people there. Stafford Beer, who had been the president of the Operational Research Society in England, so I think I was really excited about cybernetics and operations research, and so I decided to pursue graduate school in those areas.
You've obviously seen many highs. We didn't go through all the awards, but you have been feted at different levels, including World Economic Forum and other recognition. So lots of highs, and I know business journey has a lot of lows built into them.
Right.
how has your philosophy of life, or philosophy, if I narrow it down a little bit more, philosophy as an entrepreneur changed over last 20 years?
Well, I think, I'm an eternal optimist, right? And I think, you don't get into doing all this kind of stuff unless you sort of have that orientation, right? And I think the the difficulties that one comes across are many, and I think there must have been at least 3 or 4 occasions when one felt that it was all going to fall apart, right? And I think the one thing I just kept going back to was, some friends would advise me, and I had good advisors in entrepreneurship because I kind of came to it late. So I had a lot of friends who had done it before me, and so they kept telling me that the tough part is the emotional IQ, right? And the rest of it is okay. You can deal with it, but you can't, if once you let the emotional things start dominating, then you're really going to have a hard time. So try to keep that as in mind always, and I think that did help a lot in getting over the tough spots. I must also say that the fact that we were 4 of us involved was an extraordinary source of strength, right? Particularly when things went bad, right? Um, and I think I don't think I would have been able to stick to a 20-year journey as an entrepreneur, if I'd probably done it alone, right? I think there's a lot to be said if you can find the right people, that you can remain friends for 20 years or 25 years now, and still work together. I think there's nothing better than that, right? And I think certainly benefited from it. Right?
No, being optimistic is essential. Who'd be crazy enough to do this journey if you are not optimistic? Because there's so many things that can go wrong. The next section is quick questions, your gut reaction to what I say. Nothing, no thinking required, and certainly no long answers required.
Yeah.
If you were found yourself with an unplanned extra day in a city because a flight got canceled or something, where would you want to be, and what will you do with that day?
I usually look for a museum. Right.
Which city in the world would spring to your mind?
Actually, the most recent time this happened was in Dallas, and I was in Fort Worth, Dallas, and suddenly I had to extend by a day. And I asked around, and they said, there's an American Heritage Museum, and really worth visiting. So I actually walked for an hour to reach the museum, and then spent about 4 hours in there, and then walked back to my hotel. It was just extraordinary to see some of the art. It was a lot of it was about cowboys and Native American life, and extraordinary art. And I really, it's the kind of art that I would have never seen in other sort of city museums. So I got to know Dallas in a very intimate way, which I think is probably
very interesting.
Different.
What made you laugh out loud recently?
I think usually political gimmicks is what makes me laugh out loud. Right?
With friends, with just watching TV or movies?
Well, it's been a lonely couple of years with,
Right.
with the pandemic. So yeah, this is mostly, even just reading the newspaper or a magazine and yeah, just having a good laugh.
And the flip side of it, what made you cry the last time?
Um, yeah, that's a good question. I think, losing an elder in the family. I think particularly seeing my dad go, so it's very hard. And he lived, till he was 94, and we played golf, a few weeks before he passed away. So, but then, watching him sink, and he actually elected to have, um, you know, uh, to unplug the ventilator and spend a few hours with us before he passed away. That, of course, was a very difficult situation. But yeah, so that was maybe
Those
5 years.
are the most personal moment. Thank you for
More
sharing.
personal, right? Yeah, sure.
Um, if you were invited to give a lecture to all the new founders of unicorns in India, which are many these days, what would you want to talk to them about?
A different kind of unicorn, right? I think one would never have described Strand as a unicorn, right? These friends of mine from Cambridge, Shailendra, Vyakarnam, and Patke have written a book called Camels, Tigers, and Unicorns. It's about entrepreneurship out of the University of Cambridge. And I always thought of Strand as a camel, right? They're always undercapitalized, but still trying to do, innovation, deep science, and so on. And so, in some sense, given how the market sort of looks at companies like ours, I think we wouldn't have thought of Strand as a unicorn. And yet, in this deal, when Reliance, found that there was something very valuable about Strand, and they executed the deal. The stock market gave Reliance a 3.83% hike in the scrip.
That makes it a unicorn.
Of course, right? So I think the lesson will be, do innovation, do deep science, but learn that value is only created when it's embedded in a commercial engine. Right. That would be the.
Thank you so much,
Right.
Dr. Chandru. What is brand Vijay Chandru in your own words?
Yeah, that's a simple one. A historian of the now. And
historian of the now.
Historian of the now. And in fact, that's my blog site, historianofthenow.org. And because historians of the now, according to Abraham Verghese, the physician writer, begin with the study of what is today, right? Asking not how to avoid the pitfalls of the past, but how to maximize the advantage of the future.
Okay, well, that's about as optimistic a statement one could make. Right. Thank you for sharing your journey with us. It was fascinating talking to you.
Likewise. Thank you for having me, Sandeep, and thank you for doing this. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.